Thank you for that introduction. As Angela said, my name is Hannah Holmes, and I serve as the Reference and Instruction Librarian at Campbell University. I'm excited to be here today and brainstorm with you how to create more compassionate library communities. Sadly, Jennifer wasn't able to be with us today due to an unexpected family matter, so I'm going to be stepping in to cover her portion of the presentation as well. So thank you in advance for your patience on that. Oh, and DIC stands for Drug Information Center, but it doesn't have any relevance to what we're talking about today, but it is very interesting. So Jen is actually a certified yoga instructor, and she's a little better at these kinds of things than I am, but I am going to give it my best shot. So before we start, I want to take a moment and center ourselves and our minds and provide a few intentions for ourselves and this session. So you can close your eyes if you'd like to, and with your back straight, focus your attention on the heart. You can also place a hand there if that helps. First, send yourself loving kindness by repeating your chosen phrases 3 times. For example, one could be, "May I be loving and kind." Taking deep breaths. Next, think of a coworker, student, patron, or a person who you interact with. Keeping that person or being in mind, repeat the phrase 3 times. May they be loving and kind. Next, imagine the loving kindness spreading to the place that connects to many of us, the library. Imagine the people, the spaces, the work. Imagine loving kindness radiating from those libraries and into the surrounding communities. May your library be loving and kind. Slowly bring your awareness back to your breath and your surroundings, and then gradually open your eyes. So for today's session, our learning outcomes, we want to be able to apply Cate Denial's principles to create welcoming and inclusive library environments, brainstorm examples of empathy and compassion in libraries, and foster a culture of kindness. So we want this to be universal to all libraries, but today we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about higher education and academic libraries. So Jen was actually first introduced to Cate Denial at a conference, and since then has been researching and finding ways to bring her values of kindness into the library environment. Cate Denial's book, The Pedagogy of Kindness, centers particularly around higher education and challenges traditional norms of rigor and authority by promoting relational teaching, student-centered practices, and critical reflection. We were actually able to get in touch with Dr. Denial while putting together this presentation, and we asked her what she would recommend for translating this research and those practices into a library sphere. And so we'll go over this more in the presentation, but one of her biggest suggestions was to include social justice to combat systematic inequities and provide inclusive and compassionate environments. So before we get into it, I want to ask you what you think kindness looks like, specifically in libraries. And so I want to invite you to collaborate on this with us. And in the chat, you'll see a link to a Canva whiteboard. And we'll see how this goes. This is my first time using a Canva whiteboard because sadly, Jamboard, I don't think really exists anymore. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see a sticky note icon, and you can place it anywhere on the page and then begin to type your answer. And you can do more than one. You don't have to just do one sticky. So place your stickies on the left side of the board under the heading Beginning of Presentation. And then also keep this board open because we're going to revisit this later in the presentation as well. And so we'll kind of go through and brainstorm and see what we think kindness looks like. I see somebody said pizza. A smile, patience, asking patrons if they're okay, treating everyone with respect, making everyone feel welcome, listening, empathy and understanding. So like I said, you can keep this open throughout the presentation and we're gonna come back to it again at the end. But feel free to continue putting stuff on there. We wanna have a good comparison of beginning versus end and see if there's a difference by the time that we finish up this presentation. So we have our own definitions of kindness, but what do our students think kindness looks like in libraries? So we asked a couple of our student workers to respond on a few questions about kindness. And you'll see two answers up here on the screen. So they said to them, kindness is all about being considerate of others and being a warm presence. It may also be keeping someone else's well-being in mind and putting it before what you want. So what do you guys think? So kindness in academic libraries is not simply about being nice. It's a radical relational practice rooted in empathy, sincerity, and justice. Drawing from Cate Denial's Pedagogy of Kindness, it involves showing up with authenticity, embracing vulnerability, and honoring the dignity of all individuals. It includes sincere self-care, personal accountability, a commitment to continual learning, and the belief that students deserve to be seen, heard, and supported. Kindness in this context also acknowledges the structural barriers students face and seeks to dismantle them by fostering inclusive, affirming, and equitable spaces. It begins with being kind to ourselves, recognizing our limits, practicing reflection, and leading with compassion so that we can extend that same care to others. Kindness in academic libraries specifically goes far beyond politeness. It's a conscious, ethical stance that prioritizes care, justice, and humanity in every interaction. It means believing in people and believing people, recognizing the challenges they carry, and showing up in ways that are honest, supportive, and inclusive. It calls librarians and library staff to be accountable, to practice self-care, and to engage in ongoing learning. In this way, libraries become not just places of knowledge, but spaces of belonging, healing, and transformation. So this final point, believing people and believing in people, is especially important. It means trusting our coworkers when they say they're at capacity, or believing students when they say that their printer broke, or they're not feeling well, or something's going on at home. Kindness shows up in how we respond with trust and not suspicion, which creates a culture where people feel safe to be honest and human. So you may have seen in our student responses that we included the question, is higher education kind? So now I want to extend that question to you. Do you think higher education is kind? Do you agree or do you disagree? And you can pop your answers in the chat and you can also kind of type out some comments or thoughts if you have it. But I'd like to see what you think. Do you think higher education is kind? Do you agree or disagree? We have somebody that says they agree it's kind. One that says it's not kind. Not kind, not kind. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about that. So, Cate Denial points out that academia isn't always a kind place and values productivity and policy over people. Higher ed often runs on ideas like individualism, competition, and prestige. And underneath that, it's a lot of distrust. We still tend to celebrate the image of that lone genius locked in their office or their lab, totally focused on their work. But that story leaves out a lot of the harmful history behind it. So we're looking at racism, exploitation, forced assimilation. And culturally, there's a built-in suspicion of students. We assume they'll cheat, they'll skip class, or they won't do the reading. And all of this creates an environment that values control more than care and suspicion more than trust. So Jen and I, we both agree that Cate Denial in her assessment of higher education is unkind. But there are always ways that we can make it a more kind environment and be intentional about the ways that we engage with students. As Cate Denial writes, to value and practice kindness is to resist such models. In a system that invests more in hedge funds rather than human beings, we can choose to hold the line. We can insist that students, especially those without shelter, safety, health, or support, matter as they are, not just as they perform. Refusing to dehumanize is an act of care, and in higher education, it's also an act of defiance. We can refuse to dehumanize our students and presume an adversarial stance. So, how can we bring kindness into our work? Three main ways of bringing kindness into our work in libraries is by humanization, rapport building, and student engagement, and by showing up and being vulnerable. And we'll go through each of these next. So humanization is at the heart of Dr. Denial's pedagogy of kindness. And in academic libraries, it means recognizing students as whole people, not just as information seekers. When library staff prioritize kindness, we're moving beyond transactional interactions and engaging students with empathy, curiosity, and respect. Humanizing the library experience involves things like remembering names or acknowledging diverse life experiences and creating a space for students to bring their full selves into that academic sphere. It's in these small intentional acts that students feel seen and valued. This kind of relational work not only supports learning, but it also counters the alienation that can come with higher education, making the library a place of connection, care, and belonging. Humanizing others first begins with humanizing ourselves, though. In the spirit of kindness in a library setting, this can be practicing self-care by setting boundaries, honoring our limits, and allowing ourselves grace. Self-care is essential to showing up with authenticity and compassion. And when we care for ourselves, we're modeling that same kindness that we strive to extend to our students. To value and practice kindness is to resist established formal and streamlined models, especially in higher education. And it's enacting a sense of social justice and equity back in a system that might not prioritize it. Building rapport and relationships is essential to embodying a pedagogy of kindness in academic libraries because it humanizes both educators and students within a system that often feels transactional. Dr. Denial's research emphasizes that kindness in pedagogy is not just about being nice, but about recognizing the dignity, struggles, and potential of every learner. In a library context, that translates into forming genuine connections with students and faculty, creating a foundation of trust that encourages curiosity, vulnerability, and academic growth. So when library staff build relationships through approachable interactions, personalized support, and active listening, we're dismantling hierarchical barriers that affirm that students belong in academic spheres. This relational approach aligns with Denial's call for an ethics of care, transforming libraries into more inclusive and empowering environments. So meeting students in an outdoor or a relaxed environment, such as tabling an academic circle, taking walking meetings, or library events held in green spaces, can dissolve institutional barriers, encourage genuine interaction, and support mental and physical well-being. These informal encounters humanize the library, make librarians and staff more approachable, and fosters a sense of belonging that's vital to student success and community health. When librarians build genuine rapport with students, we're creating a foundation of trust that encourages deeper, more sustained engagement. Students are more likely to seek help, participate in programs, and view the library as a collaborative, welcoming space when they feel seen and valued as individuals. So here at Wiggins, this is something that I think both Jen and I do well. We often try to take walking meetings outside or go to the campus gym on our lunch breaks. And usually during that time, we also get to interact with students in a more informal setting. Not only are we being productive in our work by, taking our meetings outside and just being there, but we're also being kind to ourselves. And we're building rapport with students and humanizing ourselves to them by engaging them where they are. We're also trying to make events that involve being outdoors. So, for example, this semester we did an event where we took the library outside and brought out some materials that students may not know that we had and caught them as they were just, walking from class to class or going across campus. And a few years ago, we did a nature hike for student workers, showing them some of the research on the positive impact of nature on mental health. So there's lots of ways that you can both educate our students and show them what we have as a library, but also promote well-being and do it in a more informal setting that'll make you seem a little more human to them. So showing up and being vulnerable is a cornerstone of building that trust and connection within the pedagogy of kindness. In academic libraries, this means moving beyond transactional roles and engaging students as partners in learning. So, two authors that research and present on staff-student relationships are Peter Felton and Rebecca Glazier. So, Felton's work on student-faculty partnerships emphasizes that authentic relationships built on trust, reciprocity, and shared purpose enhance student engagement and institutional belonging. Glazier's research on relational teaching further supports this, showing that educators bring their full selves into interactions, including being honest about their uncertainties or challenges, and this causes students to respond with increased trust, motivation, and connection. So in the library setting, showing up vulnerably, admitting sometimes when we don't know something, or sharing in our students' curiosity, or offering empathy, models humanity and creates a space where students feel safe to do the same. When library staff show up authentically, admitting when we don't have all the answers, listening with that empathy, and engaging without pretense, we model the very behaviors that we hope to cultivate in our students. Vulnerability builds trust. It signals to students that they are seen not just as users or learners, but also as whole people. And this practice helps build more inclusive, relational learning environments grounded in care. And in turn, this helps to dismantle the power dynamics that often create that distance in higher education, and it makes the library a space where intellectual risk-taking and personal growth can occur. Showing up authentically means being willing to be seen, not just in our expertise, but in our uncertainty, in our curiosity, and also our humanity. Vulnerability allows space for connection, and a part of that includes making room for play and laughter. So, in higher education, where seriousness and rigidity often dominate, choosing joy can also be a radical act. And it reminds students and ourselves that learning is deeply human and that connection often begins with being warm and within shared moments of joy. So this semester, we read Glazier's Connecting in the Online Classroom in our faculty book club. So it was a really great book, and it provided a lot of examples of building relationships and engagement, many of which align with the pedagogy of kindness. And I've already seen a lot of ways in which our faculty from the book club are including these practices in their teaching. And almost all of those practices can be adopted to an in-person model, as well as something that can be used in the library as well. So now that we've talked a little bit more about what kindness is and how that we can see that show up in the library space, let's go back to that Canva whiteboard and rethink a little bit more about what we think kindness is. And let's see if our answers have changed any, if they have. If not, you don't have to put anything, but feel free to go back and we'll put new stickies on the right side of the board this time at, the end of presentations side. And we'll talk a little bit more about what kindness can look like in libraries now that we have a better definition for it. Being real and relatable. Yeah, that's part of that humanization. Awareness, making yourself seen and available outside of the library. Yeah, that's engaging students and building rapport, looking at those informal settings. A lot of really great answers over here. So feel free to continue putting stuff on that Canva whiteboard. Really great responses. So thank you all for interacting with that. And so this slide right here, you'll see a few examples of kindness. And although these are not the extent of how, these are 4 core ways kindness can show up in our library work. And that's through how we interact, how we think, how we build systems, and how we grow. So many of these actions you may already do or see, and bringing attention to it can also increase the kindness in that environment. Even small acts like validating somebody's feelings or modeling curiosity can change how students experience the library and themselves. Kindness in libraries can show up in small, intentional actions like learning students' names, listening with empathy, and being honest about what we don't know. It means creating spaces where students feel welcome and seen, modeling self-care, and responding to feedback with openness. And these practices aren't just nice. They're foundational to building trust, supporting equity, and creating a culture of care in our work. So I want to bring attention to the point about acknowledging and respecting lived experiences. Some of that might include trauma as well. And a lot of times, students' research topics are deeply personal and important to them. And sometimes they're based or rooted in their own trauma and lived experiences. It's important in those times to say thank you to students or researchers for pursuing this topic, especially if it is a personal one that might be hard to do so or traumatic. And also say that their work is important and meaningful beyond just getting a grade. They're furthering the research in the field, healing that trauma, and adding to that conversation. Another important point is modeling behavior. When we make a mistake and are corrected, we should acknowledge that we did something wrong and thank them for bringing it to our attention. It shows that you're human, you make mistakes, and you can model a learned, positive, responsive behavior to them so that they, in turn, can do the same later. It also shows that you're not a rigid authority figure who's always right. So some of those examples of kindness can be learning and using students' names when you can, especially regular visitors or student workers. Normalize saying, "That's a great question. I'm not sure, but let's explore it together." Being transparent about policies and limitations. Responding with empathy. "That sounds really hard. Thank you for telling me." Avoiding judgment or quick fixes. Offer resources only after validating feelings. Involving students in accessibility and inclusions. So if you're looking at library spaces and how to make that better, ensuring that students are in the forefront of that. Encourage library staff to take lunch breaks, use mental health days, and respect each other's time off. That's a big one, and I think that that is one that's particularly important in our library world of work. So kind of taking away from that theory of vocational awe and understanding that we all have limits and we need to respect them. And responding to critique with humility and a willingness to change. So like I said, these are not the extent of how to be kind in a library environment. There are endless ways to be kind. And a lot of you have already put a lot of other ways on that Canva whiteboard. But these are just a few examples to get us all started on thinking about what we've seen or how we can make changes. So what can you do? Let's take a moment to reflect on what kindness means to you and how it already shows up in your work. Look for ways to connect kindness with social justice and be intentional about how you act on it, whether through your collections, conversations, or daily choices. We challenge you to practice at least one act of kindness a day. Dr. Denial writes, "The choices we make, minute by minute, day by day, make a difference." We need a compassion that is self-reflective, accountable, and generous to create spaces in which we may thrive. Small, consistent actions can lead to real change. So kindness isn't an extra task. It's the way that we approach the work that we already value, with empathy, presence, and care. Be creative in how you show kindness, not only to yourself and your community, but also to the world. Every small act of empathy can ripple outward in ways that you may never see, but that matters deeply. And so this picture over here to the right is actually from this semester on Earth Day, where we spent 30 minutes picking up trash in our campus park. We provided a space to be kind to ourselves with a break outside, showed kindness to our community and our Earth by ensuring a safe and clean space. So this is just another example of a way to show kindness. And this is Jen right here, and this is her daughter and one of our coworkers' wives and our pups. So we took time to be outside and to do something good, not only for ourselves, but for our communities. So I'll end with a final Cate Denial quote. Kindness begins with one action. That action is different for everyone, every educator, every student. And I can't tell you where you should begin. But remember that a tweak is better than stagnation, that we are called to change almost every minute of our lives, and we can choose the direction in which that will go. Start small, experiment, make mistakes, make revisions. Push back against the idea that students are our antagonists and that anyone should accept judgment, meanness, and disengagement as their due. We are messy and overworked. We laugh, we despair, we have a dozen to-do lists on our minds. Given all of this, we owe ourselves a generous, thoughtful answer to the question, why not be kind? So I am open to questions now and happy to chat with you about anything. I also have our contact information here as well. If you'd like to chat with us about anything, more than happy to answer questions or provide you any of our resources, which I also have over here too. But a lot of these books were really, really great and super useful for not only higher education, but trying to translate that into a library environment. And like I said, there's a lot of ways that we're already showing kindness to our patrons and to ourselves. But I think, just putting a definition to it and making sure that we're recognizing that that kindness does exist and it's not as bleak as we think it is. And then finding other ways that we can be kind. So thank you all for being here. And if you have any questions, like I said, I'm happy to answer them. Yes, kindness definitely is key. It is. So the book that the faculty book club read on campus is Rebecca Glazier's Connecting in the Online Classroom. So it's this one right here, Building Rapport Between Teachers and Students. We also read, I think last semester or the semester before, Cate Denial's Pedagogy of Kindness. So that is also this book right here. This is the hardcover, but it has a really pretty it's got like umbrellas and stuff, really pretty colors and everything. But this is what we based most of our presentation on was the pedagogy of kindness. And there are lots of other other seminal texts for, looking at the way that we're interacting with our students. So Radical Hope, a teaching manifesto, The War for Kindness, Building Empathy in a Fractured World. And Pedagogy of Hope, this one is especially great. I read this one pretty recently, and a lot of this relates heavily to what Cate Denial talks about with Pedagogy of Kindness. And I think this is a lot of where that inspiration came from. So all of these are really, really great places to start if you're looking at how to build that empathy and create that connection in these environments. And you'll have these slides as well, so you have access to all of these references. But again, if you need anything, feel free to reach out to me or to Jen. We're always happy to answer questions about stuff.